Hello!
Don't control still sucks, so I donated the prints that art style for her birthday. I will explain how, English subtitles, and timestamps are available. Thank you!
Step 1. Concept. I kept the same concept as Rui's fake card, so the concept was and still is platformer games. For more annoying yapping, please refer to this video. Step 2. Costume design. This costume cannot be real in Project SEKAI because they can't apply transparency to 3D models. I forgot. Hehe. Step 3. Rough sketch. The rough sketch is very useful because you can draw ideas without having to make them pretty. I just draw ideas for the composition, the angle, the pose, or anything that comes to mind after deciding on a concept. Here, my idea was to show Nene's development by drawing obstacles. The obstacles are, on one hand, the platforms, which are very far away from each other, so it's hard to jump from one to another. This essentially represents skill issues. Nene's singing is beautiful, but as her story shows, she can keep progressing. On the other hand, there's a pop-up screen in the background that's announcing the defeat of an enemy. This can represent pretty much any obstacles from Nene's story, but I like to think that it's her social anxiety. She seems a lot more comfy around people now, so I think the dead enemy could be part of that social anxiety that she's vanquished. The two obstacles also go hand in hand with each other. Every time Nene has an opportunity to progress towards her dream, she meets new people. So every time she jumps to a new platform, she's met with another enemy to fight. I think Nene's social anxiety being overcome is also a result of her being more confident in her ability to impress people with her singing. They're not a danger anymore, but they're her audience and source of support. This is also the reason why I had her look forward and not back towards the dead enemy. She's moving forward. Step 4. Actual sketch. This is where I start focusing on making it look like the Project SEKAI art style. I've been focusing most of my attention on the face, so this is why I'm using so many references. Tracing is great to learn how to draw, but I wouldn't use it for an actual drawing, so I tried to copy Nene's face with a grid to make it more accurate. Things happened and it turns out my eyes are allergic to grids. I think the main trick about drawing a Project SEKAI character in certain poses is to make a Frankenstein version of them. Find references in the Project SEKAI cards that match your pose and basically glue them together. So essentially, this is what I'm doing in my own drawing. I try to make as many Frankensteins as possible by gathering as many limbs from cards as I can. It's like making an army of Frankensteins. The more you have, the stronger you get. If you're like me, you hate drawing hands. If you do, I recommend checking Saito Naoki Sensei's channel. He has a great tip to draw hands that absolutely works for me. Link to the video is in the description. Okay, so looking back at this, I made Nene's eyes huge. Thankfully, my pig friend Stela pointed out to me that it didn't look like the Project SEKAI art style at all. So I was able to pay special attention to the face later on. I kept redrawing it, don't mind me. If you can get feedback from friends, I think it's a good idea. Next, I was stupid enough to give Nene long hair. This was a pain from the beginning until the end. A word of advice: give bald people some representation, do not draw hair. My actual advice is to focus on the overall shapes rather than the lines. You need to draw a lot of lines when drawing long hair, so it's easy to get lost in the details. In order to avoid that, you should start with drawing big shapes, big colors, and then refining thinner hair strands as you go. I also like to use multiple colors when sketching hair so I know which part is closest to me or which part is behind another. Overall, it will simply feel less flat and easier to comprehend. Also, since this is just a sketch, I recommend you keep your drawing as zoomed out as possible so you can have a general overview for your entire drawing. Don't lose time drawing tiny details nobody will notice unless that's specifically your goal. It's not mine. I have learned to hate myself when drawing the pixels on Nene's shirt. I really like that pattern, but it sucked to draw. Again, I recommend coloring your sketches. I don't mean to bring up the old debates from the 16th century about whether lines or colors are the better components in art. Yes, this is an actual thing that happened, but I do think that colors get neglected a lot because we're taught to look at objects' outlines and not really what fills the outline. I think colors are really important when drawing Project SEKAI cards, so please pay attention to them as well. By the way, someone requested a tutorial about color, so I'll publish one as soon as possible. Please look forward to it. I found that the composition was pretty boring compared to my record from the same set, so I changed it to make it more dynamic. I added more platforms to guide the viewer's eyes around the drawing. There are a lot of light sources in this drawing, so I already considered the lighting during the sketching stage. But I ended up changing the light sources later on because it was too confusing to shade. Before moving on to the lineart stage, I added the missing feet and hand that were originally absent from the first composition. Yes, this was an attempt at not drawing the second hand. Yes, I am still using beginner techniques to avoid drawing hands and feet. I reworked the face after receiving more feedback from my legendary friend Stela. Nene's eyes were too big, so I had the wonderful idea of completely remaking the whole face by checking what was wrong with the proportions. Turns out the face shape was fine, but the facial features placement was all messed up. Drawing the face wrong can really mess up the whole illusion that this is the Project SEKAI art style, so I spent a lot of time reworking it. I also found out that copying facial features from other cards may not actually work all the time. Or rather, using a single reference may end up looking weird. I had to adjust her eyes based on what I thought looked good by comparing it with other references. I use 3D models to make the sword. Working with 3D models helps me save a lot of time. Step 5. Line art. The very first thing you should check is how thick the line art from Project SEKAI cards is. I can adjust the thickness later on because I use vector layers for my line art, but it's still better to get it right from the start. This time, I draw my line art using a brown color because I don't like coloring the line art later on, and the Project SEKAI artists draw the skin line art in brown. I'm not really used to drawing my line art with a color that's not black, so I was struggling a little bit. Also, I adjusted the facial features again because it's really important to get them right, and it still felt a little bit off to me. When drawing line art, I recommend zooming out and making your line as long as possible. The lines in the Project SEKAI art style all look connected and smooth, so I don't think the Project SEKAI artist drew multiple short lines when it's possible to make a single long, clean stroke. Because this is hard to do, I use vector layer features to guide the lines that I couldn't get right. Essentially, I'm just pinching the lines to make them fit my sketch. was too lazy to properly redraw the hair ribbon, so I just reused my sketch and basically never touched it again. Step 6. Base coloring. It's not a really technical process, so I don't have much to say about it. I simply color pick the colors from 2-star cards, then I bucket fill every element on a different layer. For transparent parts, I fill them like any other layer and then reduce their opacity down to 50%. When it comes to organizing my layers, I try to keep everything ordered and clear to avoid losing time, knowing I'm the kind of person who has to use 800 layers and who's too scared to merge them. So I name my layers as I go because there's so many of them I would get lost in the sea of layer 1, layer 2, layer 720 if I didn't name them. I also keep everything in folders. I basically have a folder for every element, like a folder for the hair, a folder for the shirt, a folder for the shoes, a folder for each platform, etc. Step 7. Lineart coloring. I picked the colors from the base coloring step and made them dark and called it a day. Step 8. Gather all your motivation and draw the background. If you're drawing rectangles, here is a tip for you. If you want to find the middle of a rectangle, draw diagonal lines from each corner. The intersection of the lines is the middle of the rectangle. I use this tip to cut the platforms into cubes. This can also be useful when drawing buildings. It matters for the windows placement, for example. I don't think the background was very Project SEKAI-ish in this illustration, so I'm not sure any tip I could give would be good. I hope you can still enjoy the process. It was bothering me a little that Nene didn't blend in with the background, so I made a copy of the background folder, merged all the layers from the copy folder together, then blurred the layer and set it to multiply mode on top of the Nene folder. I got too into shading the mountains. It honestly was fun to draw, so I forgot all about making them look like something you'd see in Project SEKAI. I also haven't found many, if any, references at all to draw mountains, so I'll accept my defeat on this point. By the way, to make the reflections in the water, all I did was to flip my layer and then adjust the colors. I wanted the water to feel calm, so I didn't draw any ripples, which might have been another mistake. In my defense, my references for drawing the water had no ripples either. Step 9. Lighting. I was supposed to have 4 light sources for this drawing: the sun, the stars, the platforms, and the sword. But because I thought it would look messy, I decided not to make the platforms low. I recommend transforming your selections from the lasso tools into selection layers in case you need to select the exact same parts later on, so you don't have to reselect it manually again. I focused on the light caused by the sun and the stars first. The pink light comes from the sun and the blue one comes from the stars. Because the stars aren't a very strong and bright light source, I reduced the transparency of the light on Nene's body. Also, the transparent parts also catch the light, so I drew it as well as I could. After that, I needed to draw the remaining light source, which I was too lazy to draw until now. My process isn't entirely linear, and I don't respect the steps I'm describing to you, because I'm a lazy person and I just want to draw pretty anime girls doing cool stuff. Don't worry about the sword wiggling around, as I was trying to make it look cool and I failed. I made the sword red because it's a big contrast from Nene's color palette. Since she's mostly green, it uses the complementary color contrast. It helps with attracting attention to the sword, with the tip of it pointing towards the dead enemy bottom screen, which in turn helps to understand that Nene just defeated the enemy. And also, red is the color of ketchup, so that's cute. If my life is of interest to you, I had to watch 2 entire movies to find a single reference to draw the sword the way I wanted to, which is right as it is dematerializing in Nene's inventory. Thank you Sword Art Online for providing this stupidly specific reference. Anyway, with the sword being done, I was able to finish lighting Nene. Since the light source is rather weak and localized, I only shaded the areas directly around it, like the bottom of her shirt, her sleeve, and her leg. Since the sleeve is transparent, the light from the sword and the stars also hit Nene's arm, so I added some lighting there too. Step 10. Shading. A cute detail about the Project SEKAI art style is that the girls all have a blush on their cheeks. I like it, it's cute. I recolored the eyes because I wanted to use the same style I used for my Rui card. I think what's really important when shading hair in the Project SEKAI art style is to end up with some sort of triangular shapes. Someone requested a hair tutorial, so I will make it as soon as possible. Thank you! While shading, I felt like the hair was kinda lacking details, so I attempted to add more depth by adding more hair strands. To do that, I simply drew more strands using the hair color on a different layer. This layer has the border setting turned on, so the edges of the strand automatically have line art without me needing to draw it manually. I think the Project SEKAI artists used 2 to 3 colors at most to shape the hair. I think it feels like there is more because the lighting makes the flat colors become gradients. I tried to restrain my shading to 2 colors as well and tried to make the lighting gradient as well, but it wasn't very well done. I need to study long hair next time. I tried to add hair highlights imitating the 85 sets, but I'm really not used to these types of highlights despite them being so common, so it may look off. I moved on to the goggles. By the way, shout out to Pokokun from Twitter who suggested I give Nene goggles. I shaded the glass using a multiply layer for 2 reasons. 1. The glass base coloring was on the multiply layer as well to retain some transparency and color vibrancy. 2. The base colors are a gradient, so it's much easier to shade them using a multiply layer. When it comes to shading clothes, I don't have much to say. Use lots of references when possible, and remember where the light comes from. If the light comes from the left, shade the right side. To soften the edges of the shading, I used a soft eraser and not a soft brush, and less often a blur tool. I really don't recommend using soft brushes for the shading. For drawing clothing folds, I think it's best to use triangle or diamond shapes. The transparent parts also get shaded because if they fold and bend over themselves, the light has more trouble going through, so the area is darkened. Step 11. Effects and final adjustments. I changed the sword effect a bit because it didn't feel elegant enough for a character like Nene. After that, I had the idea of adding a level up screen to emphasize both the game environment and the idea that Nene is progressing and overcoming difficulties. But I ended up thinking it looked messy and took away from the harmony of the composition, so I removed it. I did, however, add the dead enemy screen. I don't think Project SEKAI would write the word dead in a card, so I used a cute skull icon to try and make it understandable that an enemy died. For good measure, I also wrote KO next to it so it cannot be mistaken for slime. I'm not very satisfied with the enemy screen because it doesn't look very good in the bigger picture, but I really wanted to include it, so I kept it as is. I haven't mentioned it before, but I hated the bright green color of the platforms, so I changed it to something softer, more blue in the shadows and with a slight pink hue in the lights. I made Nene's shadow on the platform a pinkish hue because it complements the green and it's cute and I don't need another reason. I also changed the color of the mountains to be more pink because it looked better. I like the idea of having pixels somewhat evaporate as the enemy dies, so even if it looks ugly, I still kept it. I adjusted the colors a bit with the layer blending modes like overlay and glow dodge, and then I moved on to adding my beloved triangle particles. They actually remind me of the triangle particles found in SEKAI. And then it's pretty much done!